Can you imagine being fined thousands of dollars just for fishing in your own neighborhood lake? Well, that happened to me. But instead of paying the fine quietly, I decided to flip the entire game. And what I did next left my entire HOA in complete shock, because I didn't just fight back. I bought the lake they were trying to control and banned them from it forever. I had recently moved into a quiet neighborhood that looked absolutely perfect on the outside. You know the kind of place I'm talking about. The streets were spotless, lined with neatly trimmed trees, and every single house looked like it had been pulled straight out of a home magazine. White fences, manicured lawns, kids riding their bikes without a care in the world, and a calm, sparkling lake right in the middle of it all. For me, it felt like a dream. After years of saving, I finally had my own place in what seemed like the perfect community. I thought I'd found the kind of neighborhood where people looked out for each other, waved when you drove by, and maybe even shared pie on the weekends. That's the image I had in my head the day I signed the papers. But as I would later learn, behind those polished lawns and friendly smiles was something much darker. A homeowners association that controlled everything, down to the smallest details of how you lived your life. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it. I got the usual welcome packet in the mail with pages upon pages of rules. What color your mailbox had to be, what flowers you could plant, even how tall your grass could grow. Honestly, it felt over the top, but I figured it was just to keep the place looking nice. After all, that's what I was paying for, right? A clean, safe neighborhood. Fishing had always been my way of relaxing. Ever since I was a kid, I loved the quiet rhythm of casting a line, hearing the gentle splash of water, and just sitting back, waiting. It wasn't even about catching fish most of the time. It was about peace. And when I moved here and saw that lake, I thought, this is it. My own little sanctuary. So, on weekends, I'd grab my fishing rod, pack a small cooler with some snacks, and head down to the water. Sometimes I'd sit for hours, just me and the ripples on the lake, watching the sun dance across the surface. To me, it was pure peace. I wasn't loud. I didn't throw trash around. I wasn't bothering anyone. Or at least, I thought I wasn't. It all started one Saturday afternoon. I was reeling in a small fish, nothing special, just enjoying myself, when I noticed a woman walking toward me. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't curious. She was marching, arms crossed, like a soldier heading into battle. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she got closer, and I could feel her eyes locked on me. "Excuse me," she snapped, before she was even within normal speaking distance. "What do you think you're doing?" I was caught off guard. "Fishing," I said, holding up my rod with a sheepish smile, thinking maybe she was joking. But there was no humor in her face. "You can't fish here," she said sharply. Confused, I looked around. The lake was right in the middle of the community. "I live here," I explained. "I thought the lake was for residents." Her eyes narrowed, and she pulled out a small clipboard from under her arm, flipping through papers like she'd been waiting for this moment. "Rules are rules," she said. "Section 14, subsection C, no fishing allowed." I laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating. "Really? That seems kind of strict. I'm not hurting anyone." She glared. "It doesn't matter what you think. HOA rules strictly forbid fishing. If you want to fish, go somewhere else. This is your first warning." And with that, she turned on her heel and stormed away. I sat there stunned, rod still in my hand, fish still dangling on the line. It felt ridiculous. Who gets angry at someone for quietly fishing on a Saturday? But I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was just one of those overly strict people every neighborhood seems to have. The following week, however, I got an envelope in the mail. Inside was a bright yellow slip with bold letters, "Notice of fine." Apparently, my little fishing trip had violated community rules, and I now owed the HOA $500. At first, I thought it had to be some mistake. $500? For fishing? That was more than my monthly groceries. I called the number on the notice, but instead of clearing things up, the woman on the other end only made it worse. "Yes, mister, your last name," she said coldly. "This is a valid fine. Fishing is prohibited. Further violations will result in additional penalties, possibly even legal action." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Legal action for fishing in the lake that was literally right outside my home? I tried explaining, reasoning with them, even asking if there was some sort of exception. But the answer was always the same. Rules are rules. That night, as I sat on my porch staring at the lake, frustration bubbled inside me. This was supposed to be my dream community. I bought this house thinking I'd found peace, and now I was being treated like a criminal for enjoying something as harmless as fishing. I started noticing other things too. Neighbors avoiding eye contact, whispering as I walked by. The same Karen, who had confronted me, seemed to glare at me every time she drove past. It was like I'd been marked, singled out as the troublemaker in the community. But here's the thing about me. I don't back down easily. If anything, their pettiness only made me more determined to fight back. And little did they know, I was about to discover a loophole so big, it would change everything in this neighborhood forever. Because soon, I would find out that the HOA didn't actually own the lake. They were so desperate to control. And once I knew that, well, let's just say the entire game was about to flip upside down. One evening, as the sun began to sink low over the neighborhood, I sat at the edge of the lake, with my fishing rod in hand. The water shimmered golden under the fading light, and the air was cool and calm. I just reeled in a small fish, nothing big, just a little catch that I planned to release back into the lake. For me, this was peace. A moment away from work stress, noise, and the endless grind of daily life. But that peace didn't last long. From the corner of my eye, I noticed someone approaching quickly. Her steps were sharp, deliberate, and almost angry. I turned my head and saw her, a woman in her late 40s, arms crossed tightly over her chest, lips pressed thin like she'd just tasted something sour. She wasn't coming to say hello. Her whole posture screamed confrontation. She stopped a few feet away from me and glared. "You can't fish here," she barked, her voice cutting through the quiet evening air like a siren. At first, I thought I must have misheard her. "Excuse me?" I asked, lowering my rod slightly. "You heard me," she snapped, taking a step closer. "Fishing is not allowed. This lake isn't for that." I blinked in surprise. "I live here," I explained calmly, trying to diffuse the tension. "I thought the lake was for residents. I'm not bothering anyone." But she wasn't interested in reason. Her eyes narrowed as she tightened her arms across her chest. "It doesn't matter. HOA rules strictly forbid fishing. If you want to fish, go somewhere else." There it was, that tone. The absolute certainty of someone who thought rules were written in stone, and she was the one chosen to enforce them. The kind of person people often call a Karen. I tried again, more politely this time. "Ma'am, I didn't know. There aren't any signs posted around the lake. If I had seen one, I wouldn't have cast my line." She smirked, clearly enjoying the little power trip. "You should have read the HOA handbook. Page 47. Rules are rules. Consider this your warning." And with that, she turned on her heel and marched away without giving me a chance to respond. I sat there stunned. Was she serious? A warning for fishing? I glanced around the lake, expecting maybe to see a no fishing sign, but there was nothing. Just the calm water, the swaying reeds, and the soft sound of frogs croaking in the distance. For a moment, I thought maybe she was just bluffing. Maybe she had a personal problem with me and was throwing HOA rules around to scare me. I shrugged it off, packed up my rod, and went home, convinced that was the end of it. But it wasn't. The following week, when I opened my mailbox, I found an envelope with the HOA's official letterhead on it. I didn't think much of it at first. I figured it was another newsletter about landscaping or community events. When I tore it open, however, my stomach dropped. Inside was a neatly typed letter that began with bold, intimidating words. Notice a fine. Apparently, my little fishing trip had been officially documented as a violation of community rules. The letter claimed I had engaged in unauthorized activity on HOA-controlled property and was now subject to a fine of $500. I actually laughed when I first read it. "This has to be a joke," I muttered to myself. $500? For fishing? It sounded so absurd that I thought maybe someone was pulling a prank. But as I kept reading, the smile faded from my face. The letter detailed the violation, quoted the exact rule number, and warned me that failure to pay would result in additional fines, late fees, and possible legal action. That's when it hit me. They were dead serious. I picked up the phone and dialed the HOA office, thinking surely this was a mistake. After a few rings, a woman answered in the same cold, robotic tone I'd come to associate with bureaucracies. "Yes, this is the HOA office. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just received a fine notice for fishing. I think there must be some error. I live here. I wasn't doing anything destructive. Are you sure this is correct?" There was a pause as she looked up my record. Then she said, matter-of-factly, "Yes, mister, your last name. You were cited for unauthorized fishing in the community lake. The fine is valid." I couldn't believe it. $500? For sitting quietly by the water with a fishing pole? That's insane. Her tone didn't change. Rules are rules. All residents are required to comply with HOA regulations. If you continue to ignore them, further action will be taken. The conversation ended with me more frustrated than ever. It was clear there would be no reasoning with them. To the HOA, I wasn't a neighbor or a resident. I was a rule breaker, a problem, and they were going to make me pay, one way or another. For days afterward, I replayed that interaction with the Karen by the lake. The smug look on her face, the way she strutted away after declaring her so-called authority. It burned in my memory. And now here it was, in black and white, costing me $500. What struck me most wasn't just the fine. It was the principle of it. I wasn't vandalizing property. I wasn't disturbing the peace. I wasn't doing anything that harmed the community. And yet, I was being treated like a criminal. That's when I started realizing something important. If they were willing to fine me over something so harmless, what else were they capable of? How far would they go to control me? Or anyone else in the neighborhood? I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. I refused to pay. There was no way I was going to hand over $500 for something as harmless as fishing quietly by the lake. I wasn't damaging any property. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I wasn't leaving trash behind. All I was doing was enjoying a peaceful hobby, something that had always been a part of my life. But to the HOA, none of that mattered. At first, I thought maybe they would let it go after my refusal. But I was wrong, dead wrong. Within 2 weeks, another notice showed up in my mailbox. This time it was harsher, worded with even more authority. "Failure to pay your previous fine has resulted in an additional penalty." It read. The new fine. Another $500. I stared at the paper in disbelief. $1,000 now for fishing? It felt surreal. But before I could even process that, a third letter arrived a few days later. Another fine, another $500. At this point, they had charged me $1,500 in total. The HOA wasn't backing down. In fact, they were tightening the screws, trying to break me down financially and mentally. And it was working, at least on the social level. Neighbors I had once waved to began avoiding me. People who used to smile at me while walking their dogs suddenly crossed to the other side of the street. Parents pulled their kids closer when I walked by. It was as if I'd been branded the community troublemaker. I overheard whispers at the mailbox. "That's the guy who keeps fighting the HOA. Yeah, he won't just pay his fines. He's asking for trouble. Better stay away from him, or the HOA might come after you too." That was the part that stung the most. I had moved here thinking this was going to be a community where people supported one another. But when the HOA targeted me, my neighbors fell silent. No one stood up for me. No one questioned whether the fines were fair. They were too scared of being targeted themselves. For a while, I thought maybe I should just give in, pay the fine, and move on. But every time I considered it, a voice in my head pushed back, "No, this isn't right. You didn't do anything wrong. Why should you let them bully you?" And that's when I realized, if I kept letting them fine me for nothing, what would stop them from doing it again? Today it was fishing. Tomorrow it could be where I park my car, how I decorate my lawn, or even what color curtains I put up. No, this wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about standing up to bullies. So I decided to dig deeper. I pulled out my HOA handbook and combed through it line by line. Sure enough, it mentioned the no fishing rule. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Why would the HOA care so much about fishing? Why would they enforce it so aggressively? That question led me down a rabbit hole. I started researching property records, zoning maps, and county registries. At first, it was confusing, a maze of legal documents, deeds, and leases. But after weeks of digging, I stumbled upon something that made me stop in my tracks. The HOA didn't actually own the lake. Let me say that again. The very body that was fining me thousands of dollars for fishing had absolutely no ownership over the water they claimed to control. The documents showed the lake was still listed as private property, owned by an elderly man who had moved out of the state years ago. The HOA had been leasing it from him, using it as if it were theirs, but legally, it wasn't. I sat there staring at the paperwork in disbelief. All this time, the HOA had been bullying me, acting like they had total authority over the lake, when in reality, they were nothing more than tenants. And then came the kicker, the detail that changed everything. The lease agreement between the HOA and the owner was about to expire, and according to the county property listings, the owner had quietly put the land up for sale. That meant the lake, the very place I had been fined for fishing, was available for purchase. The thought sent a jolt through me. My heart started racing. What if I bought it? It was almost too wild to imagine. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If I bought the lake, the HOA would no longer have any control over it. They couldn't find me. They couldn't stop me from fishing. And best of all, I would finally turn the tables on the very people who had tried to make my life miserable. Of course, the practical side of me kicked in. Could I even afford it? Would it be worth the investment? I did the math, checked my savings, and even reached out to the owner. To my surprise, the negotiations weren't as difficult as I expected. The old man was eager to sell. He didn't care about the HOA. He didn't care about the community. To him, it was just unused land he no longer wanted to deal with. As we spoke on the phone, he told me, "If you're serious, I'll sell it to you. Honestly, I'll be glad to be rid of it." I hung up that night, feeling a mix of excitement and disbelief. I was just a regular resident, someone the HOA thought they could push around. But now, I had the chance to own the very piece of property they were fighting to control. And if I played my cards right, the power dynamics of the entire neighborhood were about to flip upside down. That's when an idea hit me. So simple, yet so outrageous that I almost laughed at myself for thinking it. What if I bought it? The thought sat in my head like a spark waiting to ignite a fire. At first, it sounded ridiculous. Who just casually buys a lake? But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The HOA had been acting like they were kings of the neighborhood, but in reality, they were just tenants leasing the water. If I became the owner, all their power would crumble in an instant. The idea kept me awake that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running numbers in my head. How much would it cost? Could I actually afford it? Would it even be possible? 100 doubts ran through my mind, but one thought kept pushing them aside. They've fined you, humiliated you, and turned your neighbors against you. This is your chance to take it all back. The very next morning, I picked up the phone and tracked down the property owner. He was an older gentleman who had moved out of state years ago. When he answered, his voice was raspy but polite. "Hello." "Hi, sir," I began nervously. "My name is your name, and I'm a resident in the community where your lake is located. I wanted to ask. I heard you might be interested in selling the property." There was a pause on the other end. Then, almost with relief, he said, "You want to buy the lake? Son, if you're serious, I'd be glad to get rid of it. It's been nothing but a headache for me." That was the opening I needed. We talked for nearly an hour. He explained how the HOA had been leasing it for years, and how he was tired of dealing with their constant demands and complaints. Taxes, paperwork, maintenance. It was all more trouble than it was worth for him. I made my offer, careful not to sound too eager. My heart was pounding as I spoke, because I knew this was more than just a purchase. It was the key to taking control of my own peace. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "You know what? You sound like a decent guy. If you're willing to cover the costs and sign quickly, it's yours." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. This was it, the chance of a lifetime. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of paperwork, lawyers, and financial calculations. The price wasn't cheap. Owning a body of water isn't like buying a second-hand car. But I reminded myself over and over, This isn't just about money. This is about principle. Every time I felt the weight of the cost pressing on me, I thought about those smug HOA letters, the way the Karen had barked at me by the water, the whispers from my neighbors. That anger fueled me through the process. Finally, after what felt like endless signatures and notarizations, I held the deed in my hand. My name, printed clearly on the documents, declaring me the legal owner of the lake. I can't even describe the feeling. It was like a rush of adrenaline mixed with pure satisfaction. The lake, the very place I had been punished for enjoying, was now mine. And suddenly, everything changed. The next time I walked down to the water with my fishing rod, I didn't feel nervous. I didn't feel like I had to glance over my shoulder for the HOA patrol. I sat there proudly, casting my line into water that now belonged to me. Every ripple felt like a personal victory. But what made it even sweeter was knowing the HOA didn't see it coming. They still thought they had control. They still thought their fines and rules meant something. Little did they know, their entire world was about to flip upside down. I started preparing for the reveal. Part of me wanted to burst into the next HOA meeting and slam the deed on the table right away. But I held back. Timing was everything. I wanted maximum impact. I wanted to see the shock in their eyes when they realized the power shift. In the meantime, I made quiet visits to the property office, updating records and filing all the necessary paperwork. Everything had to be airtight. No loopholes. No chance for the HOA to wriggle out of it. Each step made me more confident. Each signature made it more real. And then came the day it was official in every way. The county records were updated. The lease the HOA had been clinging to was void. The property was mine, free and clear. I remember standing by the water that evening, watching the sunset reflect off the surface. The same lake that once represented stress and conflict now felt like a symbol of victory. I smiled, imagining the look on Karen's face when she realized she no longer had the right to boss me around. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about freedom, about standing up to a system that tried to crush me, about proving that no matter how powerful they seemed, the HOA couldn't control me forever. And soon, very soon, I would let them know exactly what had happened. The very next HOA meeting, I walked in with the biggest smile I had worn in months. My footsteps echoed across the polished floor of the community hall, and instantly, dozens of eyes turned to me. You could feel the weight of the stares. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not after all the fines, the threats, the whispered rumors. They expected me to bow my head, avoid confrontation, and stay home licking my wounds. But instead, I walked in tall, confident, with a folder tucked firmly under my arm. And for the first time since moving into that neighborhood, I was the one in control. I saw her immediately. Karen. She sat in her usual spot in the second row, arms folded so tightly across her chest it looked painful, lips pursed in a smirk that screamed superiority, the kind of expression that said, "This is my domain, and you'll never win." She was so sure this meeting would be her victory lap, another chance to humiliate me in front of everyone. But today, she had no idea what was coming. The meeting began as usual, the HOA president flipping through paperwork and mumbling about landscaping fees, mailbox paint colors, and parking violations. The same robotic nonsense that bored half the room to sleep. I wasn't even listening. My mind was laser-focused on the moment I had been waiting for, the reveal. Finally, the agenda shifted. Karen's hand shot up before the president even finished his sentence. "Before we move on," she said, her voice sharp like broken glass, "I think we need to address the issue of certain residents disrespecting community property, fishing where it's prohibited, ignoring the rules, disrupting the peace." Her eyes locked onto me, blazing with accusation. She was gearing up for another one of her dramatic public takedowns, savoring the chance to drag my name through the mud once more. And that's when I made my move. Calmly, deliberately, I reached into my bag, pulled out a thick folder, and set it down on the table in front of me with a loud thud. The sound cut through the room like a gavel strike. Every head turned. Even the HOA president froze mid-sentence, his lips parted but no words coming out. "This," I said, my voice steady but loud enough for everyone to hear, "is the deed to the lake." Gasps rippled through the crowd. People leaned forward in their seats, craning their necks to see. A few neighbors exchanged shocked looks, whispering frantically to each other as if they couldn't trust their own ears. "I'm the new owner," I continued, sliding the folder across the table. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's smug expression melted off her face, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. The HOA president blinked rapidly, his face draining of color as though someone had just told him his entire world was about to collapse. I leaned forward, savoring the moment. "From now on," I said clearly, "all HOA members are banned from entering my property. That includes fishing, boating, swimming, everything. Consider the lake officially off limits." It was like I had detonated a bomb in the middle of the room. Some people gasped audibly. Others whispered in panic, trying to make sense of what they had just heard. A man in the back even chuckled under his breath, unable to contain his amusement at the chaos unraveling before him. Karen was in absolute shock. She stammered, her voice trembling for the first time since I had ever met her. "Why, you can't do that. This is our lake. We've used it for years." I tilted my head, smiling calmly. "Not anymore. It's private property now, and I own it." The president grabbed the folder, flipping through the documents with shaky hands. His lips moved silently as he scanned the deed, desperate to find some loophole, some mistake. But there was none. My name was right there, stamped and notarized. One neighbor leaned forward to peek over his shoulder and gasped. "He's not lying." The man whispered to those around him. "It's legit. His name's on the paperwork." The whispers grew louder. "How did he? When did this happen? Oh my God, the HOA doesn't own the lake anymore." I sat back in my chair, folding my arms, enjoying every second of it. The president's voice finally returned, though weaker than before. "But the HOA has always leased the lake. It's part of our community agreement." "Correction," I said smoothly. "You leased it. Past tense. That lease is terminated. I bought the land directly from the original owner. The sale is finalized, which means the lake no longer belongs to the HOA. It belongs to me." Karen's face was flushed bright red now, her composure unraveling with every word. She slammed her hand down on the table, trying to reclaim her dominance. "This is outrageous. You can't just buy it out from under us. That's not how this works." "Oh, but it is," I replied, leaning forward. "While you were busy writing me fines and sending me threatening letters, I was doing my homework. I found out you never actually owned the lake. And now, you've lost it completely." The room erupted into murmurs. A few people looked delighted, their smiles poorly hidden behind hands. Others looked panicked, realizing what this meant for their property values and lake privileges. Karen, desperate, tried one last angle. "What about the children?" she cried dramatically. "What about the families who swim there every summer? The community barbecues? You're ruining the spirit of this neighborhood." I stared at her for a long moment, then let out a short laugh. "Funny, because that's exactly what you did to me. You fined me for sitting by the water with a fishing rod. You humiliated me in front of this community. You treated me like I didn't belong. And now you expect me to care about your community spirit? No, the lake is closed. Period." Her jaw worked furiously, but no sound came out. For once, Karen had no comeback. The president sighed heavily, rubbing his forehead. He knew the fight was over. There was no HOA rule, no bylaw, no petty fine that could override the law. The deed was ironclad. Their power had evaporated the moment I signed those papers. I stood up, gathering my folder. "This meeting is over for me," I said, turning toward the door. "Enjoy your debates about mailbox heights and grass lengths. But remember this, your playground is gone. The lake is mine now, and it's off limits to every single one of you." As I walked out, my footsteps echoed louder than when I had entered. Behind me, the room was in chaos, some voices angry, some shocked, some quietly amused. But none could deny the truth. For weeks, they had painted me as the villain, the troublemaker, the outcast. And now, I was the one holding all the power. And the best part, the look on Karen's face. The queen of the HOA had finally been dethroned. The news spread like wildfire. One day, I was just the troublemaker who dared to fish in the lake. The next, I was the man who owned it. People couldn't believe it. The whispers traveled faster than gossip usually did in our little community. And in a neighborhood run by an HOA, gossip spreads like oxygen. By the time a week had passed, nearly everyone knew the truth. The HOA didn't own the lake anymore. Their control was gone. The property had been sold right out from under them, and the new owner wasn't the HOA. It wasn't the community. It was me, the same guy they had fined, humiliated, and bullied. The shift in people's behavior was almost comical. Neighbors who used to look away when I walked past now waved at me from their driveways. People who had once whispered behind my back suddenly crossed the street to strike up small talk. "Beautiful weather today, isn't it?" they'd say nervously, as though casual chit-chat could erase weeks of silence while I was being targeted. Others went further. They knocked on my door, sheepish smiles plastered on their faces, holding out olive branches that came in the form of half-hearted apologies. One man, who hadn't said a word to me during the entire ordeal, showed up holding a plate of cookies his wife had baked. "We just wanted to, say sorry," he muttered, avoiding eye contact. For not getting involved when the HOA was on your back. It wasn't personal. We just didn't want to get fined ourselves. But maybe now, you'd let us use the lake again? The kids really miss fishing." Another neighbor, one of those who had been especially quick to gossip about me, approached while I was watering my lawn. "Look," she began, shifting awkwardly from foot to foot. "I'll admit I judged you. I thought you were just being difficult. But after seeing what the HOA put you through, well, I get it now. Maybe we could, I don't know, host a community barbecue by the lake? Bring everyone together again?" I just looked at her and smiled politely. But inside, I was thinking, where were you when I was drowning in fines? Because here's the thing, I didn't forget. I didn't forget how those same people had watched silently as I was fined over and over. I didn't forget how they avoided me at the mailbox, terrified that the HOA might target them by association. I didn't forget the whispers, the sideways glances, the looks that said he's trouble. They had their chance to stand up for me, but they didn't. So I kept my rule firm. No HOA member was allowed on my property. At first, some thought I was bluffing. They figured I'd eventually soften, that the novelty of owning the lake would wear off, and that I'd go back to letting people swim, fish, and boat like nothing had happened. They thought a few smiles and apologies would undo everything. But I didn't budge. When the first neighbor tried to sneak a kayak into the water one morning, I was ready. Security cameras recorded everything, and I walked right down to the water's edge. "This is private property," I told him firmly. "Get off." The look on his face said it all. Shock, disbelief, almost anger, as if he couldn't wrap his mind around the fact that for once, the word no applied to him. That was the problem with living under an HOA. People got so used to following rules made up by a board of self-appointed tyrants that they forgot what it felt like to be told no by someone outside that system. But I reminded them. Word got around quickly that I wasn't bluffing. If anyone thought they could sneak onto the lake, I'd be there to stop them. And legally, there was nothing they could do. That's when the HOA realized just how badly they had messed up. Because the lake wasn't just water. It was their biggest selling point. It was the crown jewel of the neighborhood. Every glossy real estate brochure advertised exclusive lake access as the reason buyers should choose this community over others. The lake made people believe they were paying for luxury, for prestige, for status. And now, that was gone. The HOA board scrambled. They called emergency meetings. They drafted letters begging me to reconsider. They argued that the lake was a community necessity. Karen, of course, led the charge. She marched up to my front door one afternoon with a petition in hand, her voice shrill with desperation. "This isn't fair," she yelled. "The children need the lake. Families have swum here every summer for decades. You're tearing the community apart." I just raised an eyebrow. "Funny," I said calmly. "Because you tore my piece apart first. You fined me for fishing quietly. You treated me like I was a criminal for sitting with a rod and reel. You thought humiliating me in front of everyone would scare me off. And now you expect me to forget all that because it's suddenly inconvenient for you? No, the lake is mine. And it's closed. For once, Karen had no comeback. The HOA didn't stop there, though. They tried to fight me legally. They hired a lawyer and claimed the lake was a shared community resource. They argued I had an obligation to share it, but the law didn't care about their feelings. The deed was mine. Their lease had ended. They had no legal footing. The judge dismissed their case before it even reached a full hearing. And with that, the HOA's hands were tied. Meanwhile, I finally got what I had wanted from the beginning, peace. I would grab my fishing rod, walk down to the water's edge, and cast my line into the still lake without a care in the world. No threats, no fines, no self-important board members breathing down my neck. Just me, the water, the sky, and the quiet. I could sit there for hours, the sun glinting off the ripples, the sound of birdsong echoing across the water. It wasn't just about fishing anymore. It was about freedom, about reclaiming the simple joys that the HOA had tried to strip from me. And the best part, the same people who once judged me, who avoided me, who treated me like I didn't belong, couldn't even set foot near it. I'd watch them drive past sometimes, slowing their cars just a little as they stared longingly at the water they had once taken for granted. Their kids pressed their faces against the windows, looking out at the lake they could no longer touch. It was poetic justice. The irony wasn't lost on me either. The HOA had fined me $500 for fishing. Over and over, they had stacked those fines, certain they could bully me into submission. And yet, in their obsession with control, they had ended up destroying themselves. Without the lake, property values began to dip. Real estate agents could no longer brag about exclusive lake privileges. New buyers weren't interested. Why pay premium prices for a neighborhood that had lost its biggest attraction? The board had essentially sabotaged their own community, all because they couldn't stand the thought of one man fishing quietly by the water. And me, I couldn't help but smile at the irony every time I cast my line into the lake. Because now, every ripple in the water reminded me of one thing. No matter how powerful someone thinks they are, no matter how many rules they write or fines they issue, they can't control everything. Here's the lesson. When people try to control you, humiliate you, or push you into a corner, you always have a choice. You can surrender. You can give in to their demands, let them break you, and live under their thumb. Or you can stand your ground. You can fight back. And sometimes, if you're patient, you can turn the tables so completely that the people who tried to crush you end up crushed under the weight of their own arrogance. For me, it wasn't just about fishing. It was about dignity. It was about principle. It was about proving that one person, armed with persistence and the truth, could take down an entire system of bullies. The HOA thought they had me beat. They thought their rules were unshakable, their power untouchable. They thought a few pieces of paper with the word fine stamped on them were enough to make me fold. Instead, I found their weakness. I did the research. I uncovered the loophole they didn't want anyone to see. And I used it to take away the very thing that gave them power. Now, when I sit by that lake, I don't just enjoy the peace and quiet. I enjoy the reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting back. It isn't fighting fire with fire. It's playing the long game. It's turning your enemy's own arrogance against them. The HOA lost everything because they couldn't let one man fish in peace. And me, I gained everything, peace, freedom, and the knowledge that no one, not even an entire board of self-important bullies, could stop me from living life on my own terms. And as for Karen, well, let's just say she doesn't yell quite as loudly anymore. At the end of the day, this story isn't just about fishing, or lakes, or property deeds. On the surface, sure, it might look like a petty fight between one man and a group of stubborn neighbors. But dig deeper, and you'll see something far bigger. This is a story about standing up for yourself when people in positions of power try to push you down. It's about refusing to let intimidation, manipulation, or group pressure break your spirit. The HOA thought they had all the power. They had their rules written in neat little binders, their fine slips ready to print, and their authority stamped across every letter they sent. They believed those things made them untouchable. They thought I was just one man, someone small, someone easy to silence. And for a while, it looked like they might win. The fines stacked up, the warnings got louder, and everyone else in the neighborhood stayed silent out of fear. But here's what they didn't count on: persistence. You see, real power doesn't come from titles, or signatures, or self-appointed authority. Real power comes from knowing your rights. It comes from refusing to bend when you know you're standing on solid ground. It comes from having the courage to say, "No, I won't be bullied," even when the whole room is against you. That's what I did. I didn't yell louder than them. I didn't break their rules recklessly just to prove a point. Instead, I played smarter. I did the research. I dug into the paperwork. I found the cracks in their foundation that they never wanted anyone to notice. And when the time came, I turned those cracks into an earthquake that shattered their control completely. And that's the lesson I want you to take from this. Because in life, you'll meet people just like the HOA. Maybe not with clipboards and fines, but with the same arrogance, the same need to control, the same belief that they can silence you just because they're louder, richer, or sitting on the board. These people exist in workplaces, in schools, in families, in politics, everywhere. And when they set their sights on you, it can feel overwhelming. It can feel like you're fighting an entire system that has all the power while you have none. But the truth is, you always have a choice. You can roll over. You can give in. You can let their intimidation work, telling yourself it's not worth the fight. And if you do, maybe life gets quieter, but you'll carry that defeat inside you. Or you can stand your ground. You can look at the situation, not emotionally, but strategically. You can find the weaknesses they don't want you to see. And if you're patient, if you're steady, if you refuse to quit, you can flip the entire situation on its head. Sometimes the best way to win isn't by throwing the hardest punch. It isn't about fighting fire with fire. It's about fighting smarter. It's about keeping calm when they expect you to lose your cool. It's about thinking 2 steps ahead while they're too busy celebrating their power in the moment. And when you finally act, it's about hitting them where they least expect it, with the truth, with the law, with knowledge they didn't think you had. That's how you really win. And that's what happened here. The HOA thought they owned me. They thought they could bully me into silence. But in the end, they lost the very thing that gave them power, while I gained peace, freedom, and the quiet joy of fishing by my own lake. So remember this. Never let people bully you into silence. Never assume someone else's authority is stronger than your own voice. And never think that you have to fight harder just to win. Sometimes the smartest move is to step back, learn the rules of the game better than anyone else, and then rewrite the ending in your favor. Because when you fight smarter, not harder, when you refuse to let arrogance crush your dignity, you don't just win the battle. You win the war. And that, my friends, is the real catch of the day.